It began on a quiet Thursday afternoon, one of those peaceful days that almost dares you to believe the world is fair. The sun cast long shadows across the sidewalk. Birds chirped softly above a row of luxury boutiques, and the steady hum of conversation from a nearby café painted a picture of normalcy. But injustice doesn't wait for chaos, it thrives in silence, in assumptions, in the space between what's seen and what's believed. Officer Daniel Mitchell was doing his routine patrol in the affluent neighborhood of Westbridge Hills. It was a place of order, old money, manicured hedges, and unspoken rules about who belonged. When his eyes caught sight of an elderly black man slowly making his way toward a parked Rolls-Royce, something in his demeanor changed. Mitchell narrowed his eyes. The man was dressed sharply, too sharply, he thought, for someone who might be passing through. A charcoal gray suit, polished shoes, posture straight despite the years that weighed on him. He moved with quiet intention, one step at a time. But to Mitchell, it didn't look right. It didn't feel right. The officer pulled up beside the man, rolled down his window, and called out sharply, "Sir, can I have a word with you?" The man, surprised, turned slowly toward the voice. "Of course," he answered, his tone calm, his voice seasoned and deep. Mitchell stepped out of the vehicle and walked toward him, scanning him head to toe as if searching for something out of place. "What are you doing here?" he asked bluntly. The man looked toward the café, then back at Mitchell. "I'm heading in for lunch." Mitchell folded his arms. "Do you have ID on you?" "Certainly," the man replied, reaching into his jacket with slow, deliberate movements. He handed over a leather wallet and waited in silence. Mitchell took the ID and glanced at it, not really reading, just confirming that a name and a photo existed. Charles Everett. He looked back at the car. "This your vehicle?" "Yes, officer." "Can you prove that?" "I can. The registration is inside the glove box." Mitchell stared at him. A long pause stretched between them like a rubber band pulling tighter and tighter. "Mind stepping away from the vehicle, sir?" he asked. "Is there a reason? You look like you're casing the area." "I just parked, officer." "Step away from the car." By now, people were starting to notice. A couple seated near the café turned to watch. A teenager across the street paused, holding up a phone and hitting record. Charles stepped away, slow but proud, his eyes never lowering, his posture unbroken. His hands were visible. His movements, respectful. Backup arrived moments later, 2 officers, 1 male, 1 female. They greeted Mitchell, exchanged quick words, then turned their attention to Charles. They didn't question the situation. They just accepted the premise: elderly black man. Expensive car. Upscale neighborhood. Suspicion justified. But what none of them knew, what none of them cared to ask, was that Charles Everett had walked through fire far more dangerous than this. Born in 1942, raised in Montgomery, Alabama, Charles had seen America in its darkest shades. He remembered the sting of being told he was less. Of drinking from separate fountains. Of walking miles to school while white children rode buses that passed him by, laughing. He remembered his father being beaten for disrespecting a white man by not lowering his head when he passed him on the street. At age 18, Charles joined the United States Air Force, not because he believed the country loved him, but because he believed in what it could be. He rose through the ranks in a time when black pilots were more myth than reality. Through grit, brilliance, and unwavering discipline, he became one of the first African American pilots in his unit. He flew dangerous missions in Vietnam, lost friends, took shrapnel in his leg, and watched his own plane spiral into enemy territory, only to pull out at the last second and save an entire crew. He earned the Distinguished Flying Cross. The Bronze Star. And something that mattered even more, respect, though it had to be fought for every day. But on this day, in this moment, none of that was visible. All Mitchell saw was skin. All he felt was suspicion. And all Charles could do was wait. The officer leaned into his radio, running plates now. Possible stolen vehicle. Charles looked up, meeting Mitchell's eyes. "You've already made your judgment," he said, softly. Mitchell didn't answer. Then, just as the tension was about to snap, the door to the café swung open. A young woman in her late 20s stepped out, her apron still tied around her waist. She walked briskly toward the scene, confusion turning into outrage as she got closer. "Excuse me, what's going on here?" she demanded. Mitchell turned. "Do you know this man?" "Yes. I do," she said firmly. "He's my grandfather." That silence again, thicker this time. Mitchell blinked. "Your grandfather?" "Yes. And that car you're suspicious of? It's his. And so is this entire building." She pointed to the elegant letters painted in gold above the café entrance, Everett's Bistro. Named after the man now standing quietly beside them, the same man Mitchell had tried to humiliate. The younger officers looked at one another, their confidence cracked. The crowd grew. Cameras were rolling. What had started as a routine check was becoming something else entirely. Something ugly. Something public. Charles didn't move. He didn't speak. His silence was louder than anything Mitchell could have said. And in that moment it was clear to everyone who the real threat was, and it wasn't the man in the tailored suit. For a long moment, no one spoke. The air around them felt heavier, as if the silence itself was holding its breath, waiting for someone, anyone, to do the right thing. Officer Mitchell's face went blank, his rigid posture now unsure. The two backup officers avoided eye contact. The young woman, still standing between her grandfather and the officer, raised her voice just enough to be heard clearly by those watching. "You don't know who this man is, do you?" She didn't wait for an answer. "My grandfather is a veteran. A war hero. He flew missions in Vietnam, while people like you stayed home and judged others from behind a badge." She turned to Charles, gently touched his arm, and added, "And he built this restaurant from the ground up to honor the community that so often tried to silence him." Mitchell stepped back, suddenly aware of how many phones were pointed at him. But it wasn't just the embarrassment of being exposed that shook him. It was something deeper, the realization that the man he had treated like a criminal had lived a life of honor that dwarfed his own. Mitchell mumbled something about just doing his job and walked back to his squad car. The backup officers followed. No apology. No explanation. Just retreat. That night, the footage went viral. Clips circulated on social media, news outlets picked up the story, and hashtags began to trend. Hashtag respect Charles Everett, hashtag veteran not threat, hashtag this is America. People weren't just outraged, they were moved. Here was a man who had survived war, racism, and a lifetime of being underestimated, only to be profiled in front of his own business. But instead of anger, Charles had responded with composure. Instead of confrontation, he had stood with dignity. And that, more than anything, resonated with the world. The police department launched an internal investigation. The mayor issued a public apology. And within a week, Officer Mitchell was placed on unpaid leave. He never returned to active duty. Charles, however, didn't stop there. He was invited to speak at universities, on talk shows, and at civil rights panels. But he declined most of them. He chose, instead, to speak to young cadets at the police academy, not to shame them, but to teach them. He talked about the danger of assumptions. The history behind that danger. The cost of silence. And the power of simply seeing people as they are, not as your bias imagines them to be. He started a community program called Know Their Name, pairing retired veterans with young officers in training, helping humanize both sides. What began as a personal act of resilience became a movement, one that sparked real change, not just conversation. Over the next year, Everett's bistro expanded. Charles hired more veterans, gave scholarships to students of color, and opened a foundation supporting young aviators from underserved communities. His story, once nearly silenced, became a symbol of quiet strength, and a reminder that true power doesn't come from authority, it comes from character. One day, during a small community gathering, a boy no older than 9 approached Charles. "Sir," he asked, "are you really a hero?" Charles smiled, knelt down, and said, "No. I just never let anyone else decide who I was." That moment became one of the most shared clips from his later life. Because in just a few words, Charles Everett had captured something timeless: that dignity isn't given, it's owned. And once you know who you are, no one can take that from you. So, what does this story teach us? That racism doesn't always wear a hood. Sometimes, it wears a uniform. Sometimes, it smiles while it doubts you. But most of all, this story reminds us that you can't judge a soul by a silhouette. And that behind every face is a story you haven't heard yet, but maybe should. What would you have done if you were Officer Mitchell? Would you have stopped Charles? Would you have looked deeper? Or would you have walked right past one of the greatest men your city had ever known? Let us know in the comments. Share your thoughts. Share this story. And if you believe that respect should never be earned through suffering, but given through understanding, make sure more people hear about Charles Everett. Thank you for watching King of Tales. Don't forget to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a story that matters. In our next episode, we uncover the hidden truth behind a janitor who changed the fate of an entire school district, without anyone knowing his name. Until then, stay curious. Stay aware. And never underestimate the quiet ones.